All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. As students return to campuses this fall, we've also seen a rash of increase in hoax calls that put campuses on lockdown, and it's almost hard to keep track of the amount we've seen in just the last 2 weeks as students, young people around the country returning to their places of learning. This was the scene on Villanova. This happened twice in a matter of 4 days, and alone on Monday, law enforcement responded to calls claiming active shooters at Arkansas, Northern Arizona, Iowa State, Kansas State, the University of Colorado, Boulder, and more even on Tuesday as this rash of potentially swatting calls continues to increase. And that is a term that we're getting all too familiar with, unfortunately. Let's be joined right now by President of Safety Advisors for Educational Campuses, campus safety expert Daniel Carter. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. We've seen an increase of these swatting calls, or what feels like an increase. Can you talk about how prevalent almost these have become?
Well, what we've seen in the last week is more than we would normally expect to see. I think partly it's the back to school cycle. So that is an early time that they can get targeted.
And obviously that makes sense as people returning to campus. And we heard at Villanova that even students were just coming back for orientation. Parents were there on campus for this. Can you tell me how concerning this is from a law enforcement perspective and what they can do about these moments?
Well, it's certainly very disruptive for a campus. There can be obviously disruption. There's cost to the disruption, potential damage from the law enforcement response, as well as the cost of the law enforcement response. And then you also got the potential for alert fatigue. So when you get so many of these false messages, students start to tune out the emergency notifications they're receiving. And that really is one of the greatest potential threats. We've also got to be mindful of false information spreading, oftentimes just by mistake on social media. So if you don't fill in the gaps as an institution, your students and other campus community members are going to fill them in for you.
And that's kind of what it happens, where one active shooter call on a campus alerts other campuses and gets concerned. We did see, I believe it was the University of South Carolina, it was just a student walking around with an umbrella, and they view it from a long distance, and it's hard to see. Is this kind of a cyclical thing? Is it one that leads to another?
That's unclear. But these types of things and mistakes have occurred for decades. I can think of one incident where someone had a glue gun and the entire campus was locked down for multiple hours because one student had a glue gun, because someone saw it, reported it, and it took them hours to track it down. And that's what we do. We err on the side of caution, but it can be very disruptive when it happens, particularly if it's malicious. Yeah, and I think there's got to be a response that involves cyber investigations, partnerships with the FBI to track down anyone who might have placed one of these calls.
And do we know the origin, where these calls come from? And could it be possible that this is a coordinated effect at all?
I've read some news coverage, but I don't have any information myself.
Is that any indicative to you? Is that something that's happened in the past at all, or are these generally one-off calls?
The ones I've dealt with have been more one-off type situations, but I'm not surprised that there would be something organized.
And you mentioned the role of social media on this, and especially when you're talking about people that are 18, 19, 20 years old, they're always on social media. What aspect does social media play in some of these swatting calls?
They can inadvertently amplify the misinformation, and that's why I always encourage our clients, give out as much credible information as you can, even if it's incomplete, because your campus community will fill in the gaps, sometimes with good intentions, but sometimes they can inadvertently spread misinformation just simply based on mistakes or fear. And that's why information is critical. Get the most information out that you can. And, sometimes admit that you don't know things, and that's tough. And then you have to have a response and investigate and determine what's actually occurring.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Sometimes we don't see it from college campuses because they don't want to say things they do not know about. I want to ask you about the policies, the laws in place. What is on the books, and maybe what more can be done by different state legislators from the federal government to potentially put these swatting calls, have the consequences of these calls be heightened?
Well, at the federal level, there's the Clery Act. And under it, institutions since 2008, following the mass shooting at Virginia Tech, have had to issue what are known as emergency notifications. Those are the text alerts, the blast emails, the things that people are now familiar with for nearly 20 years. And they have to issue that once there's confirmation of an actual threat. But when you get a call in of an active shooter, most institutions are going to err on the side of caution and go ahead and send out an emergency notification, because it's easy potentially to confirm that there is a shooter. It's much harder to confirm that there isn't. That takes time, sometimes hours. And in terms of what state lawmakers can do, they can provide resources to campus law enforcement so that they can better and more quickly respond and investigate these incidents.
Potentially, what more can be done? You mentioned kind of that act that's on the books that tells universities, schools to put out the alerts. Should there be more done in there? In your eyes, what else can be done?
I think partnerships between campus and local, state, and federal law enforcement really are the key.
Very good. And I just want to ask you, kind of in place, how have universities kind of enhanced their security efforts over the last couple decades to make sure and mitigate active shooter calls?
I think since Virginia Tech, and I think people sometimes may take it for granted today, but as someone who was in this field back then, the changes have been phenomenal. And they really occurred within just a year or two after that incident, where you had these emergency notifications going out no longer in hours, but sometimes single-digit minutes, utilizing technology, utilizing collaboration amongst campus officials. And you also have trained law enforcement who now go and descend on these locations, campus police, local police, state police. Some of the incidents which have actually been active shooters in recent months have seen hundreds of officers respond.
Yeah, and that's obviously heightens some level of threat and also puts law enforcement at danger as well. We've seen that have dire consequences in the past. Is there anything we're missing here, Daniel? Anything else that people should know about that maybe is in a blind spot?
What I would encourage folks to do is to sign, if you're a parent, if you're a community member, sign up for the emergency notification list if you can for the college or university where your child is attending that's in your local community, so that you can keep up with the local information that's happening around you.
And can I ask you just to piggyback off of that? We talk about these active shooter incidents, these hoax calls, these swatting calls on campuses around the country. And you usually talk about the students. Is there something parents can do? Is there something more parents can do?
I wish I knew. My life's work has been to increase campus safety. If I had all of the solutions, I'd happily put myself out of a job. But we just have to remain collaborative, diligent, and transparent. Really, those are the keys that I've seen in my career. Work with your community, engage with your community, and utilize technology. I would say that is something I would really, really encourage investigators to do. Have cyber units, and your institution isn't large enough to have one, partner with state, local, and federal, particularly the FBI, agencies that do have that. Because tracking down these calls is something that is not always easy. But that's the solution, really, I think, to stopping them, for the false ones.
Yeah.
But the training with local law enforcement and making sure that it's done on a regular basis for actual emergencies, that's the other thing that I would say is the most important to do, is having that coordination, open lines of communication, written agreements, so that everybody knows what their job is when everyone shows up at an incident.
That is very true. All right, Daniel, thank you so much. Great insight there. And hopefully this unfortunate trend does not continue. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Andy.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation there as always as we're continuing to follow the latest. And it's always concerning when you see an alert like that come across your phone, see it on social media of the threat of a potential active shooter. And unfortunately, at different college campuses over the last several weeks, including at Villanova, Arkansas, South Carolina, Colorado. We saw it in West Virginia as well. Concerning trend of these swatting calls on the rise. And we're just hearing there from a campus safety expert about what they can do about that. I'm Andy Mack. We're back after this.